like Princess Anne. Like Anne, Princess Royal, the younger sister of King Charles III, Charlotte's older brother George is likely to be king one day,
alleging that Prince William had already told George of his fate. The future king was apparently not stunned, but George was reportedly interested in learning more about his family in history class in preparation for his future regal role.
Prince George cried. Not in front of cameras, not during a royal event, but quietly, hidden from the world because of something brutal that happened inside Balmoral Castle.
Balmoral Castle had a special place in the Queen's heart.
He's just a child, but what unfolded that day revealed how deep the cracks run behind royal walls. It wasn't just about a cruel comment or family tension. It was a moment that exposed how far the pressure, politics, and silence have reached. When a future king breaks down in private and a trusted staff member becomes the only witness, something powerful shifts. This isn't a headline, it's a wake-up call. For the first time, we're diving into the raw, unfiltered story behind that moment. A story of pain, silence, and courage, inside a family where emotion is hidden and children are expected to act like monarchs. This is what really happened when Prince George couldn't take it anymore. And what followed might just shake the monarchy from the inside. It didn't happen during a royal engagement or in front of flashing cameras. It happened deep, inside Balmoral Castle, where public smiles are replaced by silence and where even a child isn't spared the weight of the crown. Prince George cried, not because he was scolded or denied a toy, but because he overheard something that shattered his sense of security. A private conversation, meant to stay behind closed doors, somehow reached his ears. A remark made with cold precision. He'll never be ready. 4 words. That's all it took to fracture the confidence of a child raised to become a king. The comment wasn't meant for him, but it found him anyway. A royal aide, who later spoke on condition of anonymity, said George tried to stay composed. He didn't lash out. He didn't speak. He just quietly cried in a room full of adults, trained to suppress emotion. Nobody stepped forward. No comfort, no explanation. Only silence. And a staff member quietly watching a child struggle to hold back tears he didn't fully understand. That same aide revealed this wasn't the first emotional episode, but it was the most revealing. George, barely 10, already carries more pressure than most adults.
Today we are wishing His Royal Highness Prince George a very happy 10th birthday.
And unlike his father at that age, George is growing up in an era where nothing is private and every move is dissected. If the public ever saw what really goes on inside those palaces, the myth of the fairy tale monarchy would unravel in seconds. And this moment, it was just the start. The palace didn't issue a statement. No one acknowledged what happened. Because in royal life, silence is policy, and discomfort is tradition. Prince George's emotional breakdown wasn't seen as a crisis. It was treated as an inconvenience, a reminder that emotions, even in children, are liabilities when the monarchy is watching. But the real concern wasn't the tears, it was the source of them. That whispered line, "He'll never be ready," wasn't just gossip. It came from someone senior, someone within the inner circle, the kind of voice George will one day be, expected to obey without question. That's what made the moment dangerous. Not just for George, but for the system that created it. The monarchy runs on control, legacy, and obedience. A child cracking under pressure isn't just a private matter, it's a threat to the image of eternal strength the institution sells to the world. Behind the scenes, there was talk of reassigning staff, tightening security around internal discussions, and shielding George from similar slip-ups. But shielding isn't healing, and silence doesn't erase memory. That moment stayed with George. Staff say he became quieter, more careful, measuring his words in ways no child should. His laughter, once spontaneous, became polite. His eyes, always observant, started scanning the room like someone used to being watched. The crown didn't break him, but it marked him. And those marks don't fade. They grow with you. Inside the palace, they call it duty. Outside, most would call it something else entirely. Pressure no child should carry. What no one dares to admit inside the palace is that Prince George isn't just a child, he's already a symbol, a living blueprint for the monarchy's future. Every move he makes is observed. Every expression he gives is noted. He's not being raised, he's being managed. And that silent breakdown at Balmoral didn't trigger concern, it triggered containment. The royal machinery doesn't pause for emotion, it recalibrates. Within days of the incident, George's schedule was subtly adjusted. Fewer unsupervised interactions, stricter staff protocols. Every adult in his orbit was reminded of their responsibility to the crown, but nowhere in those memos was the word childhood. No one talked about how it felt for George to live in a world where trust is rationed and vulnerability is punished. Royal aides insist he's doing fine. But their version of fine means obedience without questions, composure without cracks. Sources close to the family describe a boy who's emotionally intelligent, deeply observant, and frighteningly aware of who he's supposed to become. He doesn't throw tantrums. He watches, learns, reacts like someone twice his age. And that's the tragedy hidden beneath the golden image. A child shaped not by joy, but by duty. George is already learning to play a part, not because he wants to, but because he has no other option. In this world, childhood is brief, and identity is scripted. And the more he adapts, the more the real George disappears beneath the future king he's being forced to become. Behind palace walls, preparation starts early, especially for heirs. Prince George's upbringing isn't ordinary, and it was never meant to be. His childhood is a schedule, his future already written. But what sets him apart isn't just the crown waiting for him. It's the weight of expectation already crushing his shoulders. Unlike his father, George is growing up in a digital world where a single photo can spark controversy and every public smile is dissected for deeper meaning. There's no such thing as a private moment anymore. And that's exactly why the palace is nervous. Because the more visible George becomes, the more they have to control how he's seen. His education is carefully curated, not just in math or history, but in posture, speech, and silence. Every public appearance is a performance, every handshake rehearsed. Royal insiders say he's already being taught how to deflect personal questions, how to carry grief without expression, how to wear emotional armor like a tailored suit. It's called training. But to outsiders, it looks more like conditioning. The aim isn't to raise a well-rounded child, it's to produce a flawless symbol. But symbols don't cry, symbols don't stumble. And that's where the danger lies. Because George isn't a symbol, he's a boy who cried in silence because he heard what others think he'll never be. And instead of helping him feel human, the system is doubling down, sculpting him into something he was never allowed to. Question: the crown before childhood, when destiny replaces innocence. Long before most children understand the world, Prince George was introduced to legacy, not through fairy tales, but through formal addresses, photo ops, and whispered instructions. Before he even lost his baby teeth, he was told who he would become, not what he wanted to be. There was no question of choice. Destiny was assigned. Inside the royal system, childhood is ornamental. It looks sweet in pictures, but behind the scenes, it's heavily managed. Every innocent moment is rehearsed, every smile captured for public reassurance. But George's innocence has an expiration date, and it's arriving faster than anyone expected. He's expected to memorize protocols most adults would struggle with. He's been taught how to bow, when to, wave, and what silence means in a room filled with cameras. Royal aides say he's doing well. But what does that really mean? That he obeys without asking why? That he's learning to suppress confusion with a smile? George isn't just growing up. He's being molded strategically into an emblem.
Prince George is growing up so fast. The future king flashed a toothy ear-to-ear grin in new photos taken by
The world sees a polite, well-dressed child. But beneath the polished image is a boy being stripped of something he'll never get back. The freedom to explore. Life without judgment. There are no messy mistakes allowed, no loud defiance, only silent compliance. And the worst part? He's starting to accept it. Not because he believes in the system, but because he's learning that questioning it leads to loneliness. For George, the crown isn't a future role. It's a present weight. One that's already reshaping who he really is. Inside the palace, staff members become silent witnesses. They aren't just butlers or assistants. They're the quiet eyes in rooms filled with tension, watching things unfold behind closed doors. And when Prince George cried, it wasn't in front of the public. It was in a moment when one staff member, just one, happened to be present. That person didn't speak to the press. They didn't leak a photo. But they noticed what the senior royals chose to ignore. That something in George had shifted. It wasn't just a bad day. It was a crack in the performance. Staff aren't allowed to intervene emotionally. Their job is to maintain order, not comfort. But even, they could feel the silence around George grow heavier. One former insider quietly described the energy that followed as ice cold. Not toward George, but around him. As if the room decided it was safer to move on than to acknowledge a child's pain. The royals are trained to prioritize protocol over emotion. But staff, they see the emotional cost. They see the smiles fade once the cameras disappear. They know which child doesn't sleep after an official event, which one hesitates before speaking, and which one, like George, is already too careful for his age. These silent observers don't write memoirs. They don't give interviews, but they carry truths that the world never hears. And one truth became clear that day. George isn't being raised to understand himself. He's being raised to survive the system. Children listen even when you think they don't. Inside royal walls, conversations happen behind closed doors, but the echoes travel farther than adults realize. On the day Prince George broke down, it wasn't because someone yelled or scolded him. It was because he overheard something not meant for his ears. A quiet exchange between adults, staff, or family. No one knows for sure, but the message hit like a thunderclap. He heard doubt about his strength, about whether he was prepared enough for his role. Maybe it was said casually, maybe it wasn't cruel, but to George, it meant something deeper, that no matter how perfectly he played his part, someone still questioned his place. And in the world of royalty, where praise is measured and criticism is whispered, this hit him where it hurt most: his identity. At that age, children are still building their sense of self. But George is being told who he must be, not who he is. And when that identity is shaken, it doesn't show in rebellion. It shows in quiet collapse. That's what happened. Not a tantrum, not anger, just silence. Then, tears. The kind of tears that come when you realize the adults around you see your future more then they see you. George didn't need comfort in that moment. He needed recognition. Someone to tell him he was enough, even without the crown. But the room stayed quiet. And that silence said more than words ever could. From the outside, it looks like privilege, private tutors, elite events, royal titles. But inside, it's a different story. Prince George isn't just being educated, he's being conditioned. Every move, every word, every expression is part of a larger blueprint. A royal child doesn't just grow, he's sculpted. The system doesn't wait for maturity. It builds it artificially, layer by layer, through routine, restriction, and repetition. Wake up, dress right, walk straight, speak when spoken to, smile without showing too much, never complain, never explain. It's a rigid cycle where the goal isn't joy, it's control. And for a child like George, that kind of structure doesn't guide, it suffocates. Behind the royal charm is an intense psychological shaping process. Experts embody. Language and etiquette coach him like a future CEO, not a young boy. Playtime becomes limited. Emotional outbursts are corrected, not comforted. Because inside the monarchy, there's no space for vulnerability, only presentation. That's why George's rare moment of tears sent a wave through the palace. Not because he cried, but because it slipped past the system. A moment of truth, raw, unscripted, and completely human. And instead of asking why he cracked, the response was subtle reinforcement. Back to schedule, back to image, back to silence. The crown demands discipline, even in childhood. But what no one asks is what that discipline costs, not just to the child, but to the human soul inside the air. Because when control replaces connection, you don't raise a king, you lose a boy. Prince William knows the script too well. He lived it. The silence, the weight, the expectations. He was once the young boy in tailored suits, bowing on command, standing still at funerals he didn't fully understand. And now he's watching his son walk the same tightrope. But the difference? This time, William is on the other side, not as the child, but as the father. And it's tearing him in two. Insiders close to the family say William has moments of deep reflection. Guilt, even. He wanted to modernize the monarchy, protect his children from the shadows that haunted his own youth. But the system is stronger than intention. The moment George cried, it wasn't just a child breaking down. It was history echoing. William saw himself in that pain. He recognized the exact moment when emotion collides with duty. The look in George's eyes wasn't unfamiliar. It was a mirror. And William, despite all his power, felt powerless. He's caught between roles, the future king and the present father. And in that space, choices become.
George is already filling the role of the future King of England quite comfortably.
Impossible. Push too hard and he becomes his father. Pull too softly and the institution takes over. He wants to protect George, but the crown doesn't bend for parenting. It demands heirs, not sons. And though William may comfort George behind closed doors, he knows too well that comfort isn't protection. Because when the machine starts moving, it doesn't stop for childhood. It crushes it, quietly, respectfully, and with a smile for the cameras. The moment that changed everything when a cry became a message. It was just a moment. A child crying, a royal staff member present. But inside the palace, that single moment became something bigger. It became a warning. Not to the public, to the family. Prince George's tears didn't spark headlines, but they triggered quiet panic. Behind the scenes, conversations shifted, schedules were reconsidered. Even Kate, known for her calm. Control reportedly became more guarded about George's public exposure after that day. Because the monarchy may not be built on emotion, but it reacts fast to anything that threatens the image. And a crying heir is a threat they never prepare for. It's not scandalous. It's not treason. It's worse. It's human. And humanity doesn't fit the crown's design. That's why that a moment mattered. Not because it went viral. It didn't. Not because it broke a rule. It didn't. It mattered because it reminded everyone that behind the title, behind the protocol, behind the carefully staged photos is a child. A real child. One who can break. One who can feel. And most dangerously of all, one who can remember. Because if George grows up remembering the silence that followed his pain, the lack of comfort, the cold return to routine, he may not become the king they expect. He might question the system, he might rebel against it, or he might change it. That's why this wasn't just a cry. It was a message, a fracture. And in palaces, built on image, even the smallest crack can bring the whole facade down. Every royal family survives on the illusion of perfection. Controlled appearances, timed smiles, polished words. But what happens when that illusion starts to fade, not because of scandal, but because of something much smaller, more human, a child's sadness? That's the crack number, one expected. Prince George's breakdown didn't come during a crisis or in front of flashing cameras. It happened quietly, inside palace walls. And yet, it carried more weight than a headline ever could. Because it showed something the monarchy can't afford: weakness from within. The kind of weakness that doesn't just challenge tradition, it exposes it. The palace, despite its grandeur, is built on glass. Strong from a distance, fragile up close. George's moment pierced that glass. It reminded insiders that no matter how much training, how many briefings, how tightly the image is managed, you can't hide the truth forever. A child in pain is louder than any royal statement. And even if the world didn't see it, those inside did. It shook the foundation. Not publicly, but internally. There were whispered discussions, meetings behind, locked doors, a shift in strategy. Because this wasn't just about a boy. It was about the future. If George starts resisting, or worse, questioning, the very system grooming him, what happens then? What happens when the next generation of monarchy doesn't just carry the crown, but challenges the weight of it? That's the fear now. Not rebellion, not scandal, but awareness. And once a child becomes aware, the palace can no longer protect itself with silence. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, has always played her role with precision.
During so much of my life and duty, with Catherine beside him, our new Prince and Princess of Wales.
Public poise, quiet, grace, never too loud, never too emotional. But since that moment, the one where George broke down. Something in her shifted. Insiders noticed it first in subtle ways. Her grip on George's hand during public outings got firmer. Her eyes scanned more, not for cameras, but for stress signs. She started taking control in spaces she once left to protocol officers. Because, to Kate, this wasn't just about royal parenting anymore. It was survival. A mother's instinct had been triggered. And in a palace where parenting must follow public performance, she started bending those invisible rules. Fewer public events for George, more control over his education, team. A careful reevaluation of how much exposure was too much. She knew what the institution expected, an heir, not a son. But she also knew what it took from her husband. William had been molded into royalty, and it came at the cost of a childhood. Kate wasn't. Willing to watch it happen twice, not on her watch. So, without open defiance, she began to push back, not with rebellion, with precision. A small schedule change here, a media delay, there. Always quiet, always measured, but intentional. Because sometimes resistance doesn't look like protest, it looks like protection. And Kate has realized one brutal truth: if she doesn't fight for George's humanity now, no one inside those walls ever will. The crown may shape the future, but it won't own her child. This race isn't just about power, it's a race against time. Prince George's face is not just the face of a child, it's the reflection of an entire generation growing up in silence. Prince William now stands at a crossroads. One path mirrors his own childhood, full of duty and shadows. The other is one he can carve for his son. But the real battle isn't just inside the palace walls anymore. It's playing out on our screens, in our conversations, and in the choices we make. The competition is no longer between heirs to the throne. It's between those who wake up and those who stay asleep. You, hearing this, are not just a viewer. You're a witness. If you stay silent, the system wins. But if you ask questions, if you raise your voice, maybe, just maybe, history changes course. Sometimes, revolutions don't come with riots. They begin with someone daring to speak the truth. So now it's your move: stay a spectator, or become the one who